I live in Colorado and used to work as a waitress at a small 24-hour diner off the interstate. I was 26 at the time, working mostly late-night shifts since they paid extra. The place was never too busy past midnight, just truckers, night owls, and the occasional group of drunk college kids grabbing pancakes before heading home. One night, around 2 a.m., a man walked in alone. He was average-looking, maybe in his early 40s, with short brown hair and a scruffy beard. His clothes were plain, jeans, a black hoodie, and work boots. Something about him unsettled me, though I couldn't put my finger on it. He sat at a booth in the far corner, where the lighting was dimmer. I walked over, holding my notepad, and asked, "What can I get you tonight?" He smiled slightly and said, "Just coffee for now, thanks, Lauren." I froze. I had no name tag. "How do you know my name?" I asked, forcing a chuckle. His smile widened. "You served me before," he said casually. I was sure I had never seen him in my life. My stomach tightened, but I brushed it off, assuming he overheard another customer say my name earlier. I poured his coffee and left him alone. Over the next hour, the diner emptied out until it was just me, the cook in the back, and this man. Every time I glanced at him, he was already looking at me. At around 3 a.m., he finally stood up, left cash on the table, and walked toward the door. As he passed me, he leaned in slightly and whispered, "Drive safe, Lauren. Watch out for nails on the road." I stood there, stiff. I hadn't told him I was leaving soon. A few minutes later, I grabbed my purse and headed to my car. The lot was empty except for my car and an old gray sedan parked near the exit. I glanced around, but saw no one. I got in my car, locked the doors, and started the engine. My headlights illuminated the wet pavement as I pulled out onto the road. The diner was a good 25-minute drive from my apartment, and most of the route was a dark, two-lane highway with no streetlights. I was about 10 minutes into my drive when my dashboard beeped, low tire pressure. I frowned. That was weird. My tires were fine when I drove to work. The pressure was dropping fast. Within seconds, I felt the steering wheel shake, and then the entire car vibrated. I had no choice but to pull over. The second I stepped out and looked at my rear passenger side tire, my stomach dropped. It wasn't just low. It was completely shredded. As I stood there, shivering in the cold night air, headlights appeared in my side mirror. A car was pulling up behind me, a gray sedan. A jolt of fear ran through me as the car slowed to a stop. My breath caught in my throat as the driver's side door opened, and a man stepped out. It was him, the man from the diner. He was smiling. "Lauren," he called out in a friendly tone. What a coincidence. I backed toward my car door, fumbling for my phone in my jacket pocket. "I saw you pulled over and thought you might need some help," he continued, walking toward me slowly. "You got a flat?" I nodded stiffly, my fingers shaking as I unlocked my phone. "I can change it for you," he offered, his voice disturbingly calm. "No trouble at all." "I'm good," I said quickly. "I already called someone." That was a lie. I hadn't even dialed anyone yet. But before I could, my heart nearly stopped. The man suddenly tilted his head. His smile faded just a little. "Really?" he murmured. "Who?" I swallowed hard. "My boyfriend. He's on his way." His expression remained unreadable for a moment. Then he nodded. "Smart girl," he said softly. Without warning, he turned and walked back toward his car. But instead of getting inside, he reached into his pocket and pulled something out. My stomach dropped when I saw the metallic glint in his hand. A knife. I didn't think. I jumped back into my car and locked the doors. He was already running toward me. Before I could start the engine, I heard a deafening smash. The rear passenger window shattered, sending glass everywhere. I screamed, covering my head with my arms. I barely had time to process what was happening when I saw his arm reaching through the broken window, grasping at the door handle. I pressed the horn, slamming it down, hoping it would scare him off. It worked. The man flinched, pulling his arm back. For a split second, he hesitated. Then, without a word, he sprinted back to his car. I fumbled to start my engine. My tires screeched against the pavement as I peeled away, shaking so badly I could barely keep my hands steady on the wheel. I looked in the rearview mirror. The gray sedan had made a sharp U-turn and was now speeding off in the opposite direction. I drove straight to the nearest gas station, parked under the bright lights, and called 911 with trembling hands. The police arrived quickly, I described the man, the car, everything. They found my shredded tire had been slashed, not just punctured, but deliberately cut. They checked security footage from the diner. The man had no plates on his car. No ID was left behind. Nothing. It was like he never existed. A week later, I got a call from the police. The case was still open. No suspect had been found. I quit my job the next day. I haven't worked a night shift since. But sometimes, even now, when I drive home late at night, I still check my mirrors. And sometimes, I swear I see a gray sedan lingering, just a little too long in the distance. I was 17 when this happened. I worked the late shift at a small 24-hour diner in rural Pennsylvania, the kind of place that only had a handful of customers after midnight, mostly truckers, night shift workers, and the occasional drunk college kid looking for greasy food before heading home. It wasn't my dream job, but the money was decent, and it was usually quiet, at least until that night. It was a slow Thursday evening, just me and the cook Dale in the back. Around 11:45 p.m., the bell above the door jingled. I looked up from wiping down the counter and saw him. A tall, thin man with messy dark hair and a scruffy beard. He wore a faded brown jacket, and his jeans were too big for his frame. Something about him immediately made my skin crawl. He didn't sit down right away. Instead, he stood just inside the doorway, scanning the diner. His eyes landed on me, and for a few seconds, he just stared. I forced a polite smile. "Take any seat you'd like." He hesitated, then walked toward the booth in the far corner, the one near the large window facing the parking lot. He sat down stiffly, his shoulders hunched, and his hands folded on the table like a child waiting to be scolded. I grabbed a menu and walked over. "Can I get you something to drink?" He didn't answer at first. His eyes weren't on me anymore. They were focused on the window, like he was waiting for someone. "Sir?" I tried again. His head snapped toward me so suddenly that I almost took a step back. Then, in a low, rasping voice, he muttered, "Do you ever feel like someone's watching you?" I blinked. "Excuse me?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'll just have coffee." I nodded, feeling an unease settle in my chest. I turned to walk away, but before I could take a step, he added, "And keep the blinds open. I need to see." That was the first moment I truly felt afraid. I poured his coffee, watching him out of the corner of my eye. He barely touched it. Instead, his gaze remained fixed on the window, eyes darting back and forth like he expected something, or someone, to appear. Then, just as I was refilling the sugar dispenser at the counter, I heard it. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from the window. The man in the booth stiffened. I turned slowly, my stomach nodding. The parking lot was mostly empty, just my car, Dale's truck, and an old blue sedan parked near the street. But there was no one outside. I swallowed hard. "Did you hear that?" The man nodded. His fingers were gripping the edge of the table, so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. He whispered, "He's here." A chill crept down my spine. "Who?" The man didn't answer. He just kept staring out the window, his breathing shallow. I forced a laugh, trying to shake the nerves. Maybe just the wind. He finally looked at me, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. "It's not the wind." He followed me. My stomach twisted. I turned to the window again. The rain had started up, blurring the street lights outside. Then I saw it. A figure standing by the blue sedan. Not moving. Just standing there, facing the diner. I felt my throat tighten. "Sir, do you know that guy?" The man's breathing quickened. He shook his head. The figure outside remained motionless. I couldn't make out his face through the rain and glare, but I could feel his stare. Then, he started walking. Not toward the diner entrance. Toward the window. The man in the booth flinched and pressed himself against the back of the seat. His hands were trembling. "He knows I'm in here." I took a step back. The figure outside reached the window and stopped. He was wearing a hood. His face was hidden in shadow. Then, slowly, he raised a hand and tapped the glass. Tap, tap, tap. Dale, the cook, walked out of the kitchen just as I stumbled away from the window. "What's going on?" he asked, frowning. I pointed toward the glass. "There's a guy outside." Dale stepped forward, squinting through the rain. His expression darkened. "I don't see anyone." I snapped my head back to the window. The man was gone, but the fog from his breath still clung to the glass. The diner felt too quiet. Even the hum of the neon sign outside seemed to have dimmed. Dale shrugged. Probably some drunk messing around. You want me to walk you to your car later? I nodded, but the man in the booth suddenly slammed his hands down on the table. No, he hissed. We both turned to him. His eyes were wide, darting between us. His voice was barely a whisper. He's not gone. He's waiting. The way he said it made my skin prickle. I turned back to the window. The rain had gotten heavier, but something felt wrong. Then I realized what it was. The blue sedan. It had been parked near the street when I first saw it. Now, it was at the very edge of the parking lot. Closer. The man in the booth let out a shuddering breath. He's going to wait until I leave. Dale crossed his arms. Then don't leave. The man let out a short, humorless laugh. I have to eventually. I wanted to tell him to call the cops, but deep down, I had the sinking feeling that whoever was out there wouldn't be found. Dale pulled up a chair. All right, buddy. You're not leaving alone. We'll stay here until morning if we have to. I nodded. Yeah, we'll wait him out. The man looked at both of us, his eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place, relief maybe, or fear. He nodded slowly, and so we waited. The figure never came back to the window. The blue sedan remained parked in the lot for hours, unmoving, engine off. By sunrise it was gone. The man thanked us and left, but before he did, he said something that still lingers in my mind. He doesn't stop. He just picks someone new. I never saw him again, but every now and then, when I'm working late and I hear a soft tapping at the window, I wonder if the man in the hood found someone else, or if he's just waiting for me to leave. I used to work at a small 24-hour diner in Texas, right off a long stretch of highway that cut through miles of open fields and dense woods. The kind of place where truckers stopped for coffee, drifters passed through unnoticed, and sometimes people who had nowhere else to go sat at the counter all night. I was 25 at the time, working the late shift. It wasn't my first job as a waitress, but it was the first time I ever felt afraid at work. That night was eerily quiet. The rain had been coming down hard for hours, drowning out the usual sounds of the highway. My co-worker, a cook named Ray, was in the kitchen cleaning up, and I was the only one out front. It was around 12:30 a.m. when the bell over the door chimed. A man walked in, his clothes soaked from the rain. He was young, maybe early 20s, skinny, with messy dark hair and sunken eyes. He wore a gray hoodie, the hood pulled up, and his jeans were so damp they clung to his legs. I grabbed a menu and started my usual greeting, but before I could say anything, he cut me off. Can I sit somewhere away from the windows? His voice was low, urgent. I hesitated for a second before nodding and leading him to a booth in the back corner, the furthest seat from the windows. He sat stiffly, glancing around like he expected someone to walk in after him. "You okay?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. Then, after a moment, he muttered, "There was a man outside." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He swallowed hard, eyes flickering toward the door. He was standing by the gas station a few miles back, just standing there, watching cars go by. I pulled in for gas, and he didn't move. He just stared at me. When I got back in my car, I saw him in my rearview mirror. He was walking toward me. I drove off fast, but his hands clenched into fists. I think he followed me. A chill ran down my spine. I turned and looked out the diner's large front windows. The rain blurred the view of the parking lot, but I could make out the dim glow of the streetlights reflecting off the pavement. Nobody was there. "You want me to call the cops?" I asked. The guy shook his head quickly. "No, I just need to sit here for a bit." I nodded and took his order, just a coffee. I kept glancing toward the windows, expecting to see someone standing out there. But there was nothing. For the next 20 minutes, the guy barely touched his coffee. He just sat there, gripping the cup, his eyes darting toward the entrance every time the wind made the door creak. Then, at exactly 1:06 a.m., the power went out. The diner went completely dark except for the emergency exit sign glowing in the back. The rain pounded harder against the windows. Ray cursed from the kitchen. Damn storm knocked the power out again. I pulled my phone from my pocket, turning on the flashlight. "Hold tight. It usually comes back in a few minutes." I was about to head to the kitchen when I heard it. Knocking. Not at the front door. At the back door. A slow, deliberate knock. 3 times. My breath caught in my throat. Ray and I locked that door earlier. It led to a narrow alley behind the building, an alley that didn't have a street entrance. The only way to get back there was to walk through the woods. I turned to the guy in the hoodie. He was frozen, his hands gripping the table so tightly his knuckles were white. "It's him," he whispered. The knocking came again, this time louder. Ray came out of the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron. "What the hell is that?" I swallowed hard. "I think someone's at the back door." Ray frowned. "That's impossible. No one should be back there." The knocking stopped. For a few moments, there was only silence. The rain outside seemed impossibly loud, filling the empty diner with a relentless, pounding noise. Then, just as I thought maybe whoever it was had left, a whisper, right outside the back door. Too soft to make out the words, but chilling enough that my skin crawled. Ray grabbed a knife from the counter and motioned for me to stay put. I wanted to tell him not to open the door, but my voice wouldn't come out. He stepped into the back hallway, disappearing into the darkness. I turned back to the guy in the hoodie. His eyes were wide, his whole body trembling. Then, a loud crash. I jumped. Ray yelled something, and I heard the sound of metal scraping against the tile floor. I bolted toward the kitchen. Ray was standing near the back door, breathing heavily. The entire door was covered in deep, jagged scratches, as if something with long nails or a knife had been dragged across it. There was a small, shattered window near the top of the door, and outside, in the darkness, 2 pale hands pressed against the glass, fingers long and bony, leaving wet streaks on the surface. Ray grabbed the handle, but I screamed, "Don't open it!" The fingers twitched. Then they vanished. A second later, we heard footsteps running down the alley. The power flickered back on. We stood there for a long time, listening, but the footsteps had faded into the rain. By the time we worked up the nerve to check outside, there was nothing there. No footprints, no sign that anyone had been standing there at all. Just deep claw-like marks across the door. The guy in the hoodie left after that, thanking us in a shaky voice before driving off into the night. For the next few weeks, I kept waiting to hear news about someone being found out in those woods. Someone with long, bony fingers and a twisted smile. But no one was ever caught. A month later, I quit that job. And to this day, whenever I hear rain hitting my window late at night, I swear I can hear it again. A whispering voice, right outside my door.